Hey everyone, this is Erica from Confessions of a Homeschooler, and I'm back today with a fun tutorial. I'm going to show you how to make this quilt behind me. I posted it on my Instagram, so a lot of you have probably already seen it, but this was super easy, and since I'm doing a how to get started quilting series, I thought it would be fun to give you guys a project you could get started on. Now this one uses basic half square triangles, so I'll show you how to make that, and it's super easy to put together. It goes really fast, and it's a great project if you're really beginning quilter. So if you want to see how to make this quilt, then let's get started. Okay, so I just wanted to show you really quickly one of the blocks up close. Now, this one star right here is made of several blocks going across, and they're all just a half square triangles. Now, each block, as you can kind of see right here, is a half square triangle. That means half of the square is taken over by a triangle. And as you can see, half of the blocks have two prints on them, and then the other half were made using a print plus a background fabric, and you can use any color that you want. And then the corners were just cut out of your background fabric. They're not sewn or pieced or anything like that. So all that it takes to make these blocks is to learn how to make a half square triangle. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. And then I'm also gonna show you several different ways that you can arrange your half square triangles. And there's even more than what I can show you in this video, but to make different blocks. So you don't even have to make this particular star quilt if you don't want to. You can arrange your blocks however you want, and there's all kinds of different patterns you can come up with. So these blocks each are turning out at 25 inches square once they're finished. So my quilt has 3 across and 3 down, so it's quite a large quilt, but it was really easy to put together. So let's get started on making this quilt. So the first thing we're going to want to do is cut our fabric, and you're going to cut 36 10 by 10 inch squares. You're going to cut 2 out of each print. You're also going to cut 18 10 by 10 inch background squares and 36 6 3/4 by 6 3/4 inch background squares as well. I like to put the 2 print piles in 2 piles labeled A and B, and that way it's easy to keep them separated. So the first thing we're going to do is taking one of our background squares and one of our print squares, we're going to place them right sides together, and then I'm just using a regular straight stitch here on my 1/4 inch foot, and you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way around the outside of these 2 squares. And I just leave my needle down, lift my presser foot, and pivot around the squares. If you happen to sew off the edge, it's not a big deal. You can just put it back in and then sew another 1/4 inch seam down the next side. So don't stress out too much about that. Just try and make sure you get a nice 1/4 inch seam all the way around your 10 inch squares. You're going to repeat this process for all of the remaining background squares and pattern squares in one of your piles. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is cut our squares diagonally going both directions, and as you can see, I'm not moving my fabric, just moving my ruler and just being careful not to adjust, move the fabric at all. And then you're going to cut all the way across your corners, and you're going to end up with 4 half square triangles when we're done. And these should be measuring, if you'd like to trim them up, 6 3/4 inch square. Now I'm going to take them over and press them open, and I like to press toward the dark, so as you can see I'm just pushing right here to get a nice crease along that line. And now we're going to repeat that same process, but instead of using a background, we're going to use both of our colored fabrics from the other pile of 10 inch squares that we created. And I just like to try and choose 2 that are contrasting in color, but that don't clash with each other. Now this particular fabric I'm using is called Fresh Cut. It's by Basic Gray, and it has some really nice, pretty, clean, springy, fresh colors. And so I really thought that was a great fabric choice for this particular quilt. I wanted it to be nice and bright and colorful. And again, we're just sewing a 1/4 inch all the way around, making sure that we have right sides together. And there we go. And again, we're going to do the same thing, cutting these blocks diagonally again. And now you can square them up using the diagonal line on your ruler, and I just trim off any excess or the little dog ears that are poking out afterward. Now we're going to line them up like this to make a pinwheel in the center, and I'm going to flip the right side over onto the left and just sew a 1/4 inch down that side on both of those. Once they're sewn together, we're actually going to sew the top row to the bottom row. Same situation here. We're going to sew 1/4 of an inch down the middle. And then when we're done, just to reduce some of the bulk there, we're going to press our seams open. And if you can nest your seams in the center as well, that's a great idea. These pinwheels can get kind of bulky in the center there, so I use a lot of steam and even some of the spray if I need to. And I'll iron it from the back side, then flip it over, and then iron it from the front side just to make sure that I have nice, good points. Now here you can kind of see me pushing out a little bit. I'm just pressing lightly just to push any of the fabric kind of away from the center. The next thing I'm going to do is start assembling the star tips, and I'm going to fold, as you can see, these down from the top, and we're just going to sew 1/4 of an inch along those edges right there. Now that those are sewn together, we're going to flip those and sew them on, and just make sure that you've got the coordinating fabrics touching so that you get an actual star tip. Otherwise you'll have a very scrappy looking star, and that's okay as well. I'm also going to iron those seams going in toward the center. That way our seams will nest when we sew the top and bottom row. We're going to follow the same procedure here, and I'm going to sew those star tips together, sewing them down 1/4 of an inch down the white. Now that those are together, we're going to add our square corners to each side, and I'm going to do the same thing on the top row as well, sewing 1/4 of an inch down each side to create our top and bottom rows. Okay, now that all of that is done, we're going to sew our bottom row onto our star unit, and as you can see, I pressed those, but that bottom and top row with the points going out so that our seams can nest. And we're going to sew 1/4 of an inch all the way down and do the same thing along the top row. Now just to show you what I mean by nesting my seams, as you can see here, I've got one seam pressed one direction, the other pressed the other, and you just kind of snap them together, and that way when you sew them you get nice crisp points, and it also reduces the bulk when you go to iron your quilt open. So I usually just stick a pin at any intersections like that, and then when I go to sew it's nice and neat. So here's a finished block, and it's 25.5 inches square. Alright, so the next thing you're going to want to do is to sew the horizontal rows going across. So I've sewed rows 1, 2, and 3, and then we're going to go ahead and sew the horizontal rows vertically together. Now if you wanted to add sashing or anything else fun at this time, that would be a great time to do it. Since these squares finished at 25.5 inches square, I didn't feel like I wanted to add some extra sashing, but it's totally up to you and what look you're going for. One quick tip I have for you is to label the top corner, left corner of each row, and hopefully you can see this, but I have rows 1, 2, and 3 here, and I just use these Marley's numbered pins, but I've also done it where I just put 1 pin here, 2 pins in here, and 3 pins, and so on. And all that does is just help keep your rows straight so that when you don't accidentally flip one around when you're sewing, and it's easier to do than you might think. So I just like to label them just so I keep everything organized. Alright, so here's the finished quilt. As you can see, it was really easy and fast to put together. If you wanted to do anything fun like borders or anything like that, now would be a great time to do that. This quilt actually finishes quite large, and it only took me a couple days to make, and that included you know, setting up shots for filming. It would have been even faster if I hadn't had to do that. There are a lot of different layouts you can use doing half square triangles, so I'm just going to show you a few. This first one is kind of a rhombus shape. This next one is just triangles in a row, which I think is a nice, simple kind of a look. The next one is like a framed square look. This next one is going to be pinwheels, and it creates a nice alternate shape as well if you just do pinwheels all right next to each other. This next one is going to be kind of a chevron, and you can make these going horizontal or vertically, which is kind of a nice change. This next one are kind of a horizontal line. It's like a scrappy line. And then this next one is a squares or diamonds shape, and you can do scrappy or all one color. This next one is kind of a cool pinwheel star, similar to the one that I did, only a pinwheel for the center instead of kind of an alternating color triangles. This next one is the scrappy diagonal squares. This next one is kind of a hexy shape, and this one's kind of complicated, so I definitely suggest laying these rows out before sewing them together. This one's kind of cool. It's like an infinity or figure 8 symbol. And this last one I'm going to show you is just another way to do the triangles. Alright guys, I hope you found that as easy as I did. I'm hoping that it'll inspire you to do your own project. If you have any questions or anything, you're always welcome to email me at eric@confessionsofahomeschooler.com. And if you do decide to make this quilt, I would love it if you would tag me on social media or send me a picture or whatever, just so I can see your projects. So I hope this has encouraged and inspired some of you to go ahead and just get started quilting. It's not as hard as it looks. It's a lot of fun. And if you have any questions, you're always welcome to email me, and I'll do my best to help you out. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you enjoy this project.